And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. I said welcome back because I know you were just listening to one of our other podcasts and you wanted to come back for more, and we have more for you. This is the podcast that is for podcasters. It's about podcasters and it's done by podcasters. And you already know it. My guest today is a podcaster. So this is the place where we all come together. We lift each other up. This is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. And I need to thank everybody. I can't start a podcast at this point without thanking all you guys. We are growing by leaps and bounds. We have all you guys liking and sharing and subscribing. Thank you so much because it's really, really, really helping our cause. And our cause right now is to allow podcasters to get on the other side of the mic and let us get to know them instead of them always having to be the ones introducing other people. So we're doing a little juxtaposition. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Let's get to this awesome person I have here with me today. Please welcome to our show the life coach, grief coach, and host of the Unapologetically Overcoming podcast, Jess Marie. Jess, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me here today.
I appreciate it very much. I got through that title somehow. I wasn't sure if I was gonna,
You
but I made
did.
it.
You
I
did.
made it.
I'm super proud of you. Good job.
Well, thank you very much. All right, now let's start right at the beginning here.
Mhm.
You're a life coach, and I think a lot of people know what that is. You're also a
Yes.
grief coach. So tell everybody a little bit about what that is, and then we'll talk about the podcast too.
Sure. So I'm very new to the grief coaching part of things. And that came about because I recently lost my sister. She passed away in August of last year. And I have experienced losses before, but learned through this process that grieving is different every single time it happens. I've learned that there's a lot of stigmas related to grief. And I've also learned that there's a lack of supports when it comes to grieving, and that a lot of the times grieving can feel very lonely and isolating. So I decided that I was going to be certified to become a grief coach. It's really just a support for anyone who needs it in the area of grief. I obviously will be focusing on sibling loss, but I will see anybody who needs support in the area of grief. If it's just somebody that they need to talk to, if it's somebody who, is looking for advice or tips on how to get through the grief process, which, never ends. It's all about learning to move with it for the rest of your life because it's not something that ever goes away. I hate that there's a need for something like this, but I'm very passionate about it because I don't ever want anybody to feel like they're grieving alone, because they're not. There are supports out there. They may be more difficult to find than supports for some other things, but they do exist.
That's great. I love that you're pursuing that also, in addition to the other things that you do.
Thank
I
you.
It would be remiss though if I didn't say again, I'm so sorry for your loss. That had to just be earth shattering. And
Thank
I
you.
read a little bit about it, in your podcast notes and stuff. So I know you actually did a podcast on what you went through
I
dealing with that.
did. Yeah, I did. It was it's difficult to talk about, but it's also important to talk about. Like, it's healing for me, and I know it's healing for other people because they hear a story like that, and maybe they are someone who has lost a sibling or who has experienced any kind of loss. And just to let them know that they're not alone, I really do think there's power in people knowing they're not alone and knowing that, like, yes, there's going to be difficult days, but not every day is going to be as difficult. And even on those most difficult days, you can get through it.
Yeah. I like that you said that earlier also that it really never ends because so many people are like, look, just you got to get over it. You got to get over it because they just don't understand, because they haven't
No.
been through it.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would first say that if you are one of those people who says, like, oh, you should be over that by now, and it's because you've never experienced it, you're lucky. Because when you have experienced it, you realize that that is, couldn't be further from the truth about getting over it. And I can't take credit for these words because I believe it was someone else that I had on my podcast to talk about their grief, is that it's not something you ever get over. It's something that you learn to live with and move with and through. You carry it with you forever. And sure, you might get better as time goes on, but it's like, it's not something that ever goes away. Like, I'm never going to stop missing my sister. I'm never going to stop loving her. I'm never going to stop wishing she was still here. So those are things that will never go away. It doesn't matter if it's a day, a week, a month, a year, 10 years, 50 years, it's not going away.
Right. It's definitely one of those if you know type of
Yes.
situations. So
Yeah.
anybody who's been through that kind of loss, they get exactly what you and I are talking about right now.
Yep.
And if they haven't, they just don't really have any kind of concept
Yeah.
for what. Um, I don't want to get too much into your grief counseling because I know that's a new thing for you, and I think it's
Yeah.
awesome that you're pursuing
Thank
that
you.
and you're going to be offering it to people because there's nowhere near enough of that out there, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, for you, how do you begin getting past something like that?
I'm a mom. So I will say that my son has been a huge reason why I have been able to continue to get up every day and do what I
There
need
you
to
go.
do because he depends on me. And it's hard. I mean, it's still hard. We're coming up on 6 months, which isn't a long time. But it's still hard on some days to get up and do what I need to do. And, we all learned about like the stages of grief and all of that. And it's like you do go through them, and some people experience them all, some people only experience a few, whatever. But like each day it's like a new day because you're trying to figure out, how am I going to get through today without this person here? And I don't think that any day is the same after you lose someone who's so important to you, like my sister was to me.
Yeah.
Like I said, I get up every day and I do what I need to do because my son needs me. Um, if he wasn't here, I really don't know that I would have gotten through, that I would have gotten as far as I have in the last 6 months. Um, and the other thing too is I allow myself to feel the sadness when I need to. And I think that's something really important because sometimes, again, we think that we've gotten to a certain point and we shouldn't be sad anymore. And it's okay to be sad. Again, whether it's been a day, a week, a month, 5 years, 15 years, doesn't matter how much time has passed. You can still feel that sadness and, work your way through it and then do what you need to do.
I mean, it's great that you have family to lean in on like that. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. So
Yeah.
I'm a dad too, so I understand exactly what you're talking about when it comes to
Yeah.
your kids.
Yeah.
It's a great way
Yep.
to kind of get yourself back on track. Going, okay, yeah, I got to take care of these guys.
Yes. Yep.
I got to get up. I got to
Yeah.
move. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
Now let's get to your podcast
Sure.
because your podcast, especially in the episodes since this your loss, you have had not an entire focus, but you've had more of a focus on grief, that type of
Yes.
thing. Before that, you really didn't. So, tell us about the podcast, where it came from, and how it's evolved.
Yeah. So, as you said, the name of my podcast is Unapologetically Overcoming, and it really focuses on topics that typically have stigmas attached to them. So, things that people are often afraid or maybe ashamed to talk about because of what the outside world may think about that particular topic. And some of the topics, which you've probably seen if you've scrolled through the episodes, some of them are heavy topics, and then there are others that are a little lighter, but things that still people don't talk about quite as much because they're like, oh, well, not everybody knows about this, or somebody's going to look at me funny if I talk about this. So, there's some serious topics, there's some more fun topics. But I really love talking about the things that kind of make people uncomfortable. Because it's those uncomfortable conversations that kind of make people aware and realize that, oh, it's not that uncomfortable after all. And I like people to know that they're not alone in whatever they have either gone through or are going through right now, and that they can get through whatever they have gone through or are going through.
Nice. Give everybody an example of like what's a little more heavy, what's a little lighter.
Yeah. So I have had people on to talk about like addiction and recovery, mental health stuff, domestic violence. So, those things would probably be more on the heavy side of things. And then I've had other people come on and talk about like alternative lifestyles, polyamory, manifestation, tarot, play therapy, like things like that. So it's kind of a wide array of topics that are covered on my podcast.
That's pretty wide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny, the not to single it out, but I've heard the polyamory a lot lately with a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the podcasters that I've talked to, that they either touch on it or give advice on it or have some kind of thing on it. But
Yeah.
are you noticing that that's a lot more prevalent like recently?
Yeah, I do think it's something that people are talking about more.
Mhm.
And like I love that because again, it's a topic that you may not consider like a heavy topic, but it's something like people are out there living that lifestyle but not always talking about it because they're afraid they're going to be judged or there's misconceptions around the lifestyle. So, I loved that interview with the she was actually a therapist for that type of population of people.
Hmm.
And she worked with them on like, exploring monogamy and polyamory and all sorts of things like that, which I loved. I was like, this is so cool because again, probably not a lot of people out there like her that are focused on that specific area. But I think it's important because if you're someone who is in that type of relationship, you may need support, within your relationship with how to deal with like friends, family members, the outside world, and all of that. So it's super important to, to have those conversations, but to also have those resources available.
Sure. Interesting. And I digress. I just have heard it a lot. So I appreciate you handling my general question there. Um,
Problem.
all right, now you've done over 60 episodes. You've been doing this since 2022. We talked about it almost 3 years. So
Yes.
you're no newbie. You've been doing this
No.
for a while. You've been around for a minute, which is awesome.
Yeah.
The what made you say you're a life coach? Okay, so I
Mm-hmm.
know you do this for people. You're becoming
Yeah.
a grief coach, which is
Mm-hmm.
awesome. But what made you sit down and say one day, you know what, I want to do a podcast. I not only want to share all of this, but I want to do it through podcasting.
Yeah. So it's kind of a funny story, actually. I had wanted to do a podcast for a really long time. I just didn't know what I wanted to talk about. And when I think about it, when I was younger, I actually wanted to be like a DJ on the radio, and never pursued that. So I'm kind of like sort of what I'm doing now, just in a different way. But it was the year. It was obviously right before the the Super Bowl in February of 2022 when I started my podcast. I
Okay.
believe that was the year that like Snoop Dogg and like all the old school rappers were performed at the Super Bowl halftime show. And I remember that I told you it was a funny story. Just stick
I
with
mean,
me
I
here.
remember I remember who played, but I don't remember who the halftime show was. So I'm going to take your word for it. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So 50 Cent came out and made like a surprise appearance or whatever during the halftime show, and afterwards there were all these memes all over social media joking around about 50 Cent's weight and how he wasn't 50 Cent anymore, he was a dollar. And I had lots of friends who were sharing those memes, and then I had a whole other set of friends who were sharing memes that said things like 50 Cent won't see your post about him gaining weight, but you know who will? Your friend, your cousin, your aunt, your sister, whoever who struggles with body image and diet and food and all of those things. And those posts resonated with me because I have an eating disorder. And while on the surface, those things are funny, and like I'm not shaming anybody who laughed at those things, like it's fine. But to someone on the other side of things, that impacted them differently than the people who were, seeing that and laughing. And it made me stop and think about how so often we put things on social media because it's funny and entertaining and whatever, but we don't often realize the reach that it has and how someone so close to you could be dealing with something that you're posting about and you don't even realize it. And it had like a negative impact on them. So, in true Jessica fashion, what I did was I made an extremely vulnerable post on Facebook and I shared a lot of information about myself that, people who were close to me knew most of the things that were on that list, but there were some things on there that people didn't know. And I, just made a point of saying, like, you don't always know what people around you are going through, and you need to be careful with your words. And the response that I got from that post was one I wasn't expecting. I thought I may have gotten like a few likes and whatever, but people commented on that post. People were sending me messages. People were stopping me that like saw me out when I was out getting my cappuccino in the morning. And they were like, Jessica, that post you made, it was so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And I was like, wow, you're welcome. And it was kind of out of that I was like, I know what I want this podcast to be about. I want it to be about all of those things that people typically don't talk about because of that backlash that they fear they're going to get from other people. And that's kind of where it was born from.
Wow, that's a story.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's quite a story.
Yeah.
My goodness. I had no idea, of course, that you had an eating disorder.
Okay.
How are you with that at this point?
I'm good. I have been in recovery for about 10 years with it. I have bulimia. I haven't like binged or purged in a very, very, very long time. But I will say that occasionally the urges are still there. But I've been in therapy. I've seen nutritionists and eating disorder specialists. So I've learned how to handle those things. And I've come a long way. And I've also gotten to a point where I'm comfortable in my own skin and with who I am. And, that's also been a journey because I didn't always feel that way. So, yeah,
Good
I'm
for
much
you.
better now than I was 10 years ago.
That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm pretty sure that that's another one of those things that you don't ever actually get over. You're kind of always
Yeah.
dealing with it, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I have friends who are like on weight loss journeys and I love that for them, but I don't often comment on other people's weight for that reason. And again, sometimes people know that about me and sometimes people don't know that about me and it's interesting to, some people want that recognition when they've lost weight or when they're working out or they look, but and again that's great, but it's not something that I feel like I need to comment on because really at the end of the day it's nobody's business how big or small you are.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I know it's tough going through these things. By the same token, the things you've had to go through yourself,
Mm-hmm.
with your bulimia, with your loss, these are the things that make great coaches.
Yeah.
And these are the things that make qualified coaches
Mm-hmm.
because they've been through these things themselves. You can look on Facebook and you're going to find, a coach every other, flip
Yeah.
of your thumb,
Yep.
who most of these people have never been through a hardship in their lives,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
when people who are going through a hardship find somebody who has been through the hardship and come out the other side, they're grateful to find that person. So yeah, at least there's that silver lining for you.
Absolutely. And I think that's so true because, a lot of times when, I fill out these questionnaires to be a guest on a podcast, they'll ask, like, what's your area of expertise or where did you learn it? And I'm like, life. That's that's where I learned it. Like I know all of the things that I know now
Yeah,
because of the experiences that I went through. I didn't learn them from a book in college. I didn't learn them because I went through a certification program. I learned them because I experienced them. I went through them, I got through them, and I'm where I am now.
love it. Love it. I do the same thing. All the coaching that I do in my areas, I've been there. And all the
Yeah.
guys that I work with know that I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
But if I hadn't, I honestly, especially with some of the stuff that I work on, I wouldn't have any business trying to coach these people.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's while it's tough that you have to go through it, maybe there's a reason. There's a reason to
Yeah.
everything, right? So
Yes, and I believe that too. I've said as much as I hate that my sister isn't here, I feel like she's given me this purpose in life that I didn't ever know I was going to have. And like, that's a gift. I mean,
right,
obviously, more than anything, I wish she was still here. But if she can't be here, the fact that I can help other people, maybe that's why that had to happen, you know?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, so you get into podcasting. You
Mhm.
decide this is what I'm going to do. The podcast is the way to go. Here's what the podcast is going to be about. So you decide you're going to get into it, and then how did you get into it? Did you go out buy a bunch of stuff, get a big old setup, or did you like grab your phone and just start talking?
So I will say I knew nothing about starting a podcast when I decided to start. I was literally like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And then I'm like, how? I have no idea what I'm doing. So I started asking a few people who I knew that did podcasting, like, what platform am I using to, to use, to record and then put it out into the podcast world. So I started there first, and I will tell you that I literally have nothing fancy. I use my laptop. I don't have a microphone. It's literally just my laptop here. I record over Zoom. I use I edit the podcast myself. I bought some jingle off of Fiverr for like $15 to play at the beginning and the end. And I do edit a little bit, but for the most part, it's just this is it. This is what it is. This is the conversation that we had. I mean, here and there have been a couple things that have happened during conversations where the guest is like, "Can you please edit that out?" And I absolutely will do that. But then recently, I had an episode, and I don't know if you heard this one. It was one of the grief episodes that I did.
Okay.
But at the beginning of the podcast, like when I'm introducing my guests, I always say I'm going to turn it over to them and let them tell us, about who they are and what they do. And I completely flipped those. Guest and we were both laughing hysterically because I'm like, that has never happened before. And I'm like, there couldn't have been a more inappropriate time for that slip up to happen. And I said to him after, do you want me to edit that out? And he was like, nope, keep it in there. And I love that he said that because like it shows the both sides to it, like we're here to have a heavy, difficult conversation, but we can still laugh. So it was kind of a beautiful thing that it happened when it did, and we had a good laugh about it. And people afterwards were like, that was great. And I was like, we didn't plan it, it just happened.
I mean, for a podcast titled Unapologetically Overcoming, I think it's pretty fitting. So
Exactly,
it's not bad.
exactly.
Not bad. All right, so you got your start. Did you have any, once you started, I know you were, passionate about your message and you had a
Mhm.
lot that led up to it. You felt strongly about doing it. Did you have
Yeah.
any obstacles you had to overcome? Anything in particular hard when you got started, other than not knowing anything?
Yeah. So the one thing that I really struggled with, and again, thankfully I have people who do this sort of stuff, so I was able to kind of network and get help, was putting my podcast image onto the platform, the hosting platform, and then getting it to upload to all of the other places where the podcast was, specifically Apple. Like for some reason, it kept telling me that my measurements were off. And when I tell you it was weeks, I was so frustrated. At one point, I was like, I give up. Like, I don't even know. I was like, I'm just going to use the generic image that's on Podbean, and I'm just going to go with that because I need the podcast out there. Um, and eventually I was able to reach out to one of my other podcasting friends who does like, the graphic work and stuff like that for podcasts. And she was able to help me. But that was probably one of my biggest struggles, was just the image for the podcast. Like I had an image, I was ready to use it, but it wouldn't transfer from Podbean to Apple. All the other ones, it was good. It was just Apple. And I'm like, what is going on here? So yeah. And in the beginning too, like the editing, when I did need to edit stuff, that was frustrating. And I don't know again if it's because of the software that I use, if there's maybe a different one out there. But now I've gotten to a point where I can pretty much edit and put things together with no problem. But in the beginning, that was a little frustrating too, because again, I literally had no idea what I was doing. I had never used, and I don't feel like I like to think I'm technologically smart, but I'm really not when it comes to that sort of stuff. So those were probably the two most frustrating things in the beginning.
Wow. Yeah, Apple, you can't take that one personally because Apple is just that way. I mean,
I've heard.
it's, yeah, one of my podcasts I put up, I think it took almost 2 full months to
Mm.
get up on Apple.
Oh
And every time I
gosh.
checked on it, they weren't even saying, oh, this was wrong or this was wrong. They were just going processing.
Oh.
That was it. It's like, well, so like every episode, my first 8 or 10 episodes, I'm going, well, we're not on Apple yet, but we're everywhere else. So,
Yeah.
hey,
Yep.
I didn't know what
Yep.
was going on. I thought just didn't like me. So I said, okay, great.
Yeah.
So you come by that honestly, but yeah, Apple can be a little tricky. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that. Where do you host now from? Is it Podbean?
It is Podbean. Yep.
Okay. How do you like that? What are the strengths and weaknesses that you see, and why do you keep using it?
Yeah, I mean, well, I will, if I'm being honest, I keep using it because I'm familiar with it at this point and I know, I know
Love it.
how it works. Like, I'm going to be completely honest. I've thought about maybe switching platforms because, other people talk about other, they're good for this reason and that reason.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I just don't think I can change right now because I am used to it. I'm comfortable. I know how it works. I got, my system down pat. So it's like, it's working for me right now. So that's why I'm still there.
I love it. That's a great, honest answer.
Yeah.
I know this one. I'm not moving.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is perfect. That's great.
I'm
But
figuring it out.
yeah,
I'm not going anywhere right now.
but Podbean's working for you and you're happy
Yeah.
with it. So that's really what matters. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And now you mentioned you don't do, I don't know if you mentioned this on the air here or with me beforehand, but you did
Uh,
say that you don't do a video.
I
You don't
don't.
do a visual. Is there a
No.
particular reason for that? And let everybody know what that is.
So initially that started because I don't particularly like being on camera and I feel like I get awkward sometimes when I'm on camera, which I see the face that you're making right now and I know
I'm like,
I
what?
well, it's different like this because like right now I feel like it's just you and I talking. Even though I know you told me that this is video and people are going to see it, I still it's like, oh, it's just us talking right now.
Okay.
But I don't know why it's different if I were to do it that way, but I don't know. That's one reason. The other reason too is because and again, I know this works for some people and if it does, that's great. But when podcasts started, it was more of an audio thing, so I like the idea of sticking to it being audio. But again, that's just my own personal preference. So
That's awesome.
maybe someday I'll branch out into video. I don't know. I'm not
You,
ruling it out completely.
you're way too young to be talking about old school, though. I mean, come on now. Guys like me, yeah, we remember old school, but I also
Yeah,
remember big, huge records, that were like this big and we put a
I
little
remember
needle on
those
them.
too. I have some of those. I used
You
to
really?
listen to them. I'm not that young.
That's great. Oh my gosh. Okay, I just wondered because I know we had talked about that. And
Yeah.
now, when you do interviews, do you do them with Zoom or do you use Riverside or what? Something like
Yes,
that.
I use Zoom.
Okay.
So it is recorded audio and video, but then again, when I release, it's just the audio that's released.
So it's like right there for you, and you just go,
Yeah.
nah, I don't want
Yeah.
it. Just toss it
Yeah.
aside. Okay.
Yeah.
To each their own. That's great. Okay. Um, well, as a suggestion, you might want to consider some video. I mean, you look
Yeah.
great, you sound great,
Oh, thank you.
you're the camera's friendly with you. You know how to act. You know what I mean? So you're not like all over the place or anything. So, and you got a good backdrop too. I mean, it looks like you got it all set up for visual. So, um, I digress. It's your podcast. I'm just saying.
I'll keep it in mind.
Keep it in mind because you'd be great at it.
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, we've kind of reached the part of the podcast where I have to ask you my one little corny question.
Okay.
I think I've built this up way too high, because you're thinking it's going to be some big exotic question.
I am. I've been waiting.
I know. Okay, so as you're doing your podcast,
Mhm.
and everything that goes into it, what is it about doing your podcast that you love the most? And what is it about doing your podcast that you really just hate?
Okay. So, what I love the most is connecting with people from literally all over the world. I've had guests on my podcast from the other side of the world. And that's what I love about the whole Zoom thing is that you can do that. You can talk to people who live in another country and they can share their story because again, even though they're on the other side of the world, chances are pretty good that somebody over here or somewhere else in the world has experienced something that they're talking about and can relate to them. So that is definitely the thing that I love the most about the podcast. And the thing that I despise would probably be the editing. Like, I always say that someday I'm going to be able to pay somebody to do it for me. Like I said, I've gotten to a point where I can do it and it's not as much of a headache. But if I didn't have to do it, it would be great.
I think you just resonated with like 90% of the podcasters out there because
Probably.
we all are like, if we didn't have to edit. Oh my gosh.
Uh-huh.
But
Yep.
that's no, that good answer. Good answer.
Thank you.
Now you do have you've got some programs and some
Mhm.
coaching that you do. You've been through it, so you're coaching from the first person here, which
Yep.
I love. Tell everybody about hey, what do you have to offer? What's your life coaching program? If you want to talk about what the grief coaching will be, you can do that too.
Yeah.
What are you putting out there?
Yeah, so mainly I focus on like mindset transformation, gratitude practices because I'm really, really big on that in my own life. I'm a firm believer in, showing gratitude and expressing gratitude and the fact that when you do that, you actually have more to be thankful for. So I'm really, really big on that. And then also a big part of it is self-love, because I want everyone, you know, I'm a woman, so specifically women, but again, anybody. I will work with anybody. But I really want people to love themselves, even like the dark, scary, messy, uncomfortable, imperfect parts of themselves, because that's what makes us who we are. And I spent far too much of my life not loving all of those parts of myself. And it really kind of held me back. So I want people to embrace those parts of themselves, and learn that they don't have to be the picture perfect version of like what society thinks we should all be when we show up in the world. It's okay to show up as ourselves unapologetically.
Nice. Is this a longer term program? Is it a short? Tell us about the program.
Yeah. So the way I have it set up right now is it's an 8-week program.
Okay.
And it can be longer if you need it to be. You can, purchase extra sessions if you need to. And then yeah, I mean, I do offer individual coaching sessions too if you just wanted to purchase, an individual session. So there's that option as well. But yeah, all of that information is on the website, so people can go there and check that out.
And what's the website? That's
It
right where I was going.
is
So what's the website?
www.unapologeticlifecoachingllc.com.
All right. I'm going to do it now once just to make sure I got it right.
Yes. Yes.
www.unapologeticlifecoachingllc.com.
Correct.
Right. Now, everything else is unapologetically. And I made
Yes.
this mistake earlier, so that's why I'm pointing it out to everybody. Because if I made it, they might make it too. It's
Yeah.
not unapologetically in the website
Right.
name. It's just unapologeticlifecoachingllc.com. Awesome.
Correct.
All right. Other ways that people can reach you, and we're not done with you yet, but since we're talking about this now,
Sure. Yeah.
other ways people can reach you.
Of course. So I do have an Instagram for the podcast, and it's unapologetically underscore overcoming. And then there is a Facebook for the podcast as well, which is unapologetically overcoming dash the podcast.
Nice. Okay. Now all the stuff's going to be in the show notes in
Mhm.
case somebody's out there driving and they're trying to write this all down furiously.
Yeah.
It'll be in the show notes. So just click on it later. You're going to be just fine. But we will put that in there. Okay. This is usually my last question, but I'm going to follow it up with one more. So I'm just giving you a little bit of a warning.
Okay.
Um, this question is especially for somebody who's, I mean, you've got 62 episodes. You've
Mm-hmm.
passed the first two milestones of podcasting, which are like 20 and 50. The next
Mm-hmm.
one's 100,
Yeah.
and once you get to 100, life changes. It just does. Your podcast
Okay.
changes, you change, everything changes. It's hard to say that to people because they're like, "Oh, well, what
Mhm.
changes?" And I go, I don't know. It just does."
Okay.
Okay, so, but you passed the first two milestones already, which, you're killing it. Um,
Thank you.
you've been around for a minute and
Mhm.
you've been doing this. So, what have you learned so far that you could say? What advice do you have for a podcaster who maybe isn't as far along as you are, or
Mhm.
is just kind of having a hard time with it? Something you've learned that might help them.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is just trust yourself. If you if you are here doing this, it's because you have something to say and your message is going to resonate with someone, even if it's only one person. And that's what I said in the beginning to myself. If only one person listens to my podcast and takes something away from it, I'm okay with that. Doesn't have to be for everybody. And like there are some episodes that I say at some point throughout the episode, I know this isn't going to be for everybody. So if you stop listening now and don't come back to this one, it's fine. Every episode isn't meant for every single person that's going to listen, but the episodes that are meant for you or that are meant for the people that you're talking to, they're going to get to the people that need to hear them. And just trust yourself in that. It is scary. I was terrified the very first time I hit publish. I was like, oh my gosh, I did it. Like, now what? Like, I wanted to throw up. Like, that's literally how I felt. I was like sick to my stomach. I was like, oh my gosh, I just did this. But then again, like the reception has been amazing from the people who listen to it. And I think you do just have to trust yourself. It's scary. It's going to be scary, especially the first time you do it because you've never done it before. But you really just have to trust yourself. You have a message, you have a purpose. And if you're wanting to do this, it means you're supposed to do it.
Nice. I like that spin on it that you're supposed to be here.
Yeah.
So it's fateful. I like
Yeah.
that. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Um, there is a lot to you. There's a lot to your podcast. There's a lot to the coaching that you bring. There's a lot to your story. I'm not sure we could tell the whole story if we had three more episodes.
No,
So I want to throw this to you, and you can take it anywhere you want to go. Is there anything else about you, your podcast, your movement, what you're trying to do here that we haven't covered that you want to make sure the people who are listening know?
I think it would be that, and this is something not in quite the same way that you're asking me, but this is where I'm thinking right now. Someone asked me one time when I was on a podcast if I could go back and change anything that had happened to me, what would I change? And I know this probably sounds like a cliche answer, but I wouldn't change anything because I wouldn't be the person that I am right now or where I am in my life right now if those things didn't happen to me. So they all taught me a lesson. Um, and granted, in the moment, I didn't know that. And I probably was wishing, like, this didn't happen to me or I want this to go away. But, like, looking back on all of those things, they shaped me and molded me into the person that I am now and into the person that is able to help people and put my story out and talk about these things so that someone else who is feeling that way doesn't have to feel that way.
Wow. I think we can kind of mic drop at that point. Um, wow. Love it. I don't know why I even asked that question, to be honest with you. I just felt like I needed to, and I was right. So, all right, we'll go with that. Um, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and for sharing all of this about you, about your journey, and about your podcast and your mission and what you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me here. I enjoyed this spin on things because again, even when like I'm on a podcast, it's being interviewed, but this is a different kind of interview and I really enjoyed this. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Spread the word. I think people are afraid of me for some reason. So
Hi.
thank you. Thanks for that. I do appreciate it.
Of course.
All right, folks. Jess Marie, life coach, soon to be grief coach, host of Unapologetically Overcoming podcast. You've just heard another fantastic interview on the Podcaster Nation with another fantastic podcaster. This is the podcast that is about podcasters. It's for podcasters. It's done by podcasters. This is the place where we're here to raise each other up. We're here to help each other out. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. This is the place. where the rising tide raises all ships. So keep sailing. Until next time.